We're back with another edition of Mac Stories Unwind, the show that's all about the picks. And we don't have a Federico surprise this week. We have actual picks. And so I'm going to let Federico kick it off this week with an interesting pick. This is not a media pick. It's a hardware pick, I guess, right?
Well, it's a hardware pick that enables more media picks, and it's sort of like a part two of last week's surprise. Although this wasn't a surprise because I've been tweeting about this and I showed you pictures of it. So my pick is the Steam Deck. Okay, so the Steam Deck, I see it as a pick that, like I said last week, it will enable future, gaming related picks here on Unwind. So the Steam Deck, for those not aware of it, it's a Nintendo Switch-like portable console made by Valve, the makers of Steam, the popular video game web store that runs on PC and Mac, but really most people care about it because it runs on PC. And last year, after many, many years of being rumored that this thing was actually in the works, Valve announced that they were making this portable console called the Steam Deck. And the proposition of the Steam Deck I thought was immediately intriguing. The idea being, what if you could play any PC game with medium specs, really, for a portable console, with something that is much more powerful than a Nintendo Switch, but obviously not as capable as not even a PlayStation 4 Pro, I would say. What if you could have that mid-range performance for any kind of PC game in a portable form factor with a console that is a bit longer, a bit chunkier, a bit heavier than a Nintendo Switch, but still something that is by and large a PC that you can take with you and play anywhere. So that was the idea. And if you've been listening to Unwind and you've been listening to App Stories, I guess you may be already familiar with this kind of concept, because it's the Steam Deck is effectively Valve getting into the space of Windows handheld consoles / computers that we've been covering here on the show for a while. You may be familiar with the Aya Neo and the Aya Neo Next that we covered before. And over the past few years, there has been this, surge in popularity for these kinds of devices, like the Aya Neo consoles, like the One Player X consoles. There's a bunch of Windows manufacturers that are making these Switch-like devices to sort of try and bridge the gap in gaming between having the catalog and freedom of a PC ecosystem with the convenience of a Nintendo Switch. And the Steam Deck is Valve's sort of official entry into this space and saying, we think we can do this better than the other folks. Now, I have a lot of thoughts that I'm going to try to condense to a few minutes here on Unwind, John. And if you have any specific questions, please stop me.
I do. I'm gonna. Maybe you can weave this into what you're about to say, which is, I one of the things that intrigues me about this, and I wonder about, is because it's a Linux-based system, how does it compare to a true Windows setup for gaming?
Okay. So you're getting right to the core of the Steam Deck story here. There's two core themes that we need to touch upon. First is the software, and the second is the hardware. Starting from the software, so the Steam Deck is not a Windows machine by default. Out of the box, the Steam Deck does not run Windows. You can flash Windows on it, you can install Windows on it, and I believe Valve has since released updated drivers for Windows. But by default, out of the box, this thing runs a version of, I believe, Arch Linux. It's a popular Linux distro with SteamOS built on top of it, right? So SteamOS built on top of an Arch Linux distro. Now, this means a couple of things. When you power on the Steam Deck and sign in with your Steam account, you will see a portable version of SteamOS. This is called gaming mode. By default, you see gaming mode. Gaming mode is a touch-friendly, because the Steam Deck, like the Nintendo Switch, has actually a 720p touch-enabled display. You will see this touch-friendly, simplified version of the Steam UI. If you've ever used Steam and you have if you do gaming on a Mac for whatever reason, or you have a gaming PC, You may be familiar with Steam Big Picture. Steam Big Picture is a specific Steam UI mode that appears when you connect it to something like a TV or
Right.
an external monitor. It's a simplified, sort of slimmed down Steam UI. The gaming mode on the Steam Deck, the UI that you see by default, is kind of similar to Big Picture in that it's very simplified, more consistent than the regular Steam desktop UI, and it sort of revolves around this tabbed navigation for your library, your games that have been optimized for the deck, games that you can download from the store, and more or less you can use the touch controls or you can use the D-pad, and there's two front-facing buttons, one to open your quick settings, the other to open, it's a Steam button that serves like a sort of like a hub. You press the Steam button and you see all the core navigation pages. Now the thing is, gaming mode is a default, but you can exit out of it and you can boot the Steam Deck into desktop mode. And desktop mode is a proper Linux desktop environment. Again, it runs Arch Linux. So you have your Arch Linux defaults, like for example, you have the Dolphin file manager, which is different from Dolphin emulator. On Arch Linux, the file manager, so basically the equivalent of a Finder, is called Dolphin. You have your App Center, your sort of like your package manager, which is called, I believe, Discover, which is where you go to install apps, sort of like an app store, basically. But this is a Linux desktop environment. You have freely resizable windows, and you can tweak settings. You can connect to Wi-Fi. You can browse the web. It's a PC that runs Linux, but it's desktop mode. Now, why would you enter desktop mode on Steam Deck? Well, there's a couple of things. First is if you want to install non-Steam software, but make it accessible in the non-games category of gaming mode. For example, Microsoft has been collaborating with Valve to make Xbox Cloud available on the Steam Deck via Microsoft Edge. So the reason why desktop mode is important is you can install a beta version of the Microsoft Edge browser. You need to run some terminal commands to optimize it because, of course, it's Linux. You got to use the console. And hey, it's console with a K. Okay. So, it's real. It's for hackers. That's why. But basically, the idea is you can install, it's sort of like a home screen bookmark. Think about it this way. It's like a home screen bookmark on your iPhone. It's like when you save a web app to your home screen. You do the same in desktop mode. You install Microsoft Edge, you modify it, like you give it a custom logo that says Xbox Cloud and all that kind of stuff, and then you pin it to the non-games section of gaming mode. So desktop mode you use to install additional software, to tinker around, to have a terminal, to have an app center, to install emulators, right? To install Dolphin emulators, to install the PSX emulator, all that kind of stuff. Now, desktop mode also matters for, I'm actually gonna get into this in a minute. I want to talk about the hardware very quickly first, and then I'll close it up with what I've been doing with the Steam Deck, which is where desktop mode comes up again. In terms of hardware, this is a heavier console, a chunkier console. Like the physical footprint is bigger than a Nintendo Switch, right? The Nintendo Switch looks tiny.
How wide is it compared to your Aya Neo that you have?
It's wider. It's wider than the Aya Neo. Yeah, it's longer horizontally. Yeah, for sure. But I feel like Valve did a really good job with weight distribution, especially because like in the middle of it's not heavy where the display is. It feels heavier where the controllers are, but it doesn't really bother me. This is the kind of console that I play either in bed or while I'm sitting on the sofa or something with my elbows placed somewhere, either on my lap or on a desk. And if I'm holding the console in two hands and my elbows are resting somewhere, I think it's totally fine. What you get out of this, of course, is the convenience of having a Steam-enabled machine that follows you around. For example, last week, I was able to continue playing my Elden Ring save in Viterbo. So I was not in Rome, but I just took the Steam Deck with me and I played for like an hour in Viterbo. And because Steam keeps my save data synchronized in the cloud, when I came back home on my gaming PC, my progress was already there. So it gives you the freedom to take your PC gameplay session out of the context of your home and play anywhere you want. Now, obviously, performance is not what you may get with you don't have a 3080 NVIDIA GPU in this thing. You have an AMD, I believe it's an RDNA 2 GPU, which is much more powerful than my 2021 AI Neo. It's going to be more powerful than the AI Neo Next even. The AI Neo Next will have a more powerful CPU, but the GPU ultimately is what matters for gaming performance, and I believe the Steam Deck will beat out even the AI Neo Next. To give you some concrete examples, I can play Elden Ring, which is a somewhat graphically intensive game. It's also open world, so it's big open spaces with tons of detail. I can play Elden Ring on my Steam Deck at 720p resolution. You cannot go higher than that. At high settings, so not maximum, but high settings, without any problems. Mind you stay on 30 FPS with the occasional bump to 40. You're not gonna get stable 60 FPS at high, but that's still quite an accomplishment to play Elden Ring in a portable form factor. High settings, 30, 35 frames per second, and you get almost 2 hours of battery life. I think it's pretty awesome. And of course, if you go higher than that, the battery is going to last, less than an hour, at which point you got to plug in this thing. And it's got a USB-C port and you can plug it in. And of course, because it's a PC after all, you can tweak your performance settings. You can choose how warm you want the console to go in terms of temperature. You can tweak all sorts of stats. So that's for the hardware. Really, I've been and of course, less graphically demanding games are totally fine on this thing. John, for example, Tunic plays excellently on the Steam Deck. And so you can have, you can play Tunic on a desktop PC, but then you can continue playing on a Steam Deck.
Let me interrupt you for a second and ask you again about the screen in particular, because you said it was 720p, and I think a lot of people, when they think that resolution, they think, oh, well, that's a really bad resolution for gaming, because everybody wants, obviously to have a 4K resolution when they're playing, but when you're using something that is that small and that close to your face, I got to imagine that the fact that it's 720p is, it's a lot less of a big deal than if you were putting that 720p on like a 50-inch television. Exactly.
It really doesn't matter when it's, that close to your face.
Right, because it's 7-inch screen, is it?
7-inch screen, it's totally fine, and that's also why the Nintendo Switch has a 720p resolution, right? It really doesn't matter when it's that close to your face. So I'm okay with the default resolution. I would have preferred an OLED display on this thing, like the Nintendo Switch, and especially jumping between my portable OLED display, the Nintendo Switch OLED, and the Steam Deck. Colors on the Steam Deck are washed out in comparison because it's not OLED, right? So the final thing I will mention, and I'm sure we'll talk about the Steam Deck again in the future when I will have eventually, I'm sure, a specific game that I'm playing on the Steam Deck. The thing I want to mention is how messy the situation is right now when it comes to HDMI out. So the Steam Deck, because it's a portable PC, it supports via the single USB-C port that it's got. It supports USB-C hubs. Valve is making a USB-C official dock that, however, was delayed. So not sure when that is coming out, in 2022 at some point. But you can plug in a USB-C hub, and in theory, you can do HDMI out. So you can plug in, anything you can plug in into a USB-C hub, you can plug in, like a keyboard, a mouse, an HDMI monitor, and in theory, the Steam Deck will support an external, like a proper external monitor feature. Now, I've been going through some back and forth here because I couldn't figure out why my system wasn't working, right? I tried, I had a Thunderbolt dock that wasn't working, and I thought that it was the fault of the Thunderbolt dock itself. So I got a new Anchor hub, like the 7-in-1 Anchor hub, and it also wasn't working. I was like, how? I saw people on YouTube testing HDMI out support for the Steam
Is it the
Deck.
flavor of USB-C you were using? Thunderbolt versus USB-C?
You'll never guess what it was. But as is often the case, I need to thank a random person from the internet. More specifically, user AWOLCZ from Reddit. He mentioned, I found a trick that made it work in my case. And I'm telling you, I was going like, I don't know what it is that I'm doing wrong. Well, to make it work, I need to plug in my USB-C hub that is externally powered, that has an HDMI cable connected to my portable display, the one that I mentioned last week. I need to plug in the hub into the Steam Deck, put the Steam Deck to sleep by pressing the power button once, then wake it again, and at that point, the connection to the external display will work.
Oh, it's doing like almost like a soft reboot in a way where
don't ask me
it doesn't
why,
recognize the connection unless it's first like disconnected its own internal connection to video.
Something like that. Like that. So but still, now that I have it working, this to me feels like it's a very early feature.
Yeah.
Because
I don't know how someone would have figured that out. That takes a lot of experimenting to figure that sort of thing out.
Yep. So thank you. Let's please put a link in the show notes for this comment on Reddit so that other people can thank the user. There's a couple of weird things that I would like to see Valve improve. The first is, if you connect your Steam Deck to an external display while in gaming mode, you see a scaled up UI for gaming mode that works. You can use the D-pad, you can use the analog stick, you can press the A button to confirm interactions, and it works. However, while in gaming mode, games do not see the resolution of the external display. Meaning, if I'm in the standard gaming mode, I plug in my external monitor and I start up Elden Ring and I go into the system settings, it doesn't let me use 4K, even though my external monitor is a 4K monitor. Even though the image passes through just fine, even though the audio passes through just fine, it doesn't let me use 4K resolution. It's stuck on 720.
Does this mean you're only getting 4K for the actual UI of the Steam Deck? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. To get 4K out of the games, I need to boot into desktop mode.
Yeah.
Boot into desktop mode, so at that point, the external monitor becomes like an additional display, so you drag your Steam windows into it, and if I start Elden Ring in that mode, then it lets me use 4K, and it lets, it sees the real
That's essentially what you have to do to get the FSR upresing to work too, isn't it? I heard you explain that. Is it similar to that? Great
point. I still need to figure that out, because in desktop mode, the Steam overlay that tells you whether the upscaling, so this machine learning upscaling mode is called FSR, but that overlay doesn't show in desktop mode. So I tried to play Elden Ring at native 4K via the Steam Deck connected to an external monitor. And I can tell you, at native 4K, even at low graphic settings, I was getting something like 15 FPS. So it really struggles. But it's sort of playable, meaning you get sub 30 FPS, something like 28, 29 FPS, at least to my eyes, it seemed like that, with 1440p low graphic settings.
All right. Could you do something? Could you try something like 1080p and maybe, like a middle ground between 720?
I could. Exactly. I want to try like 1080p, but like low or medium. Right. And I think I need to figure out how the upscaling mode, how FSR works in desktop mode, because I need to do more research there, because I was able to get this to work like 10 minutes before the show.
Oh, all right. Well, that's interesting. I do kind of regret not having ordered a Steam Deck myself when these things were announced. It's really an intriguing system, and given what you've said about what it can do, it's actually a fairly reasonably priced system compared to something like the Aya Neo, right? The Aya Neo is like $1,400-$1,500 depending on which one you order, and the high-end Steam Deck is $650, I believe.
It's very aggressively priced compared to other options. On the market.
I think between Valve's scale and the fact that they're really selling software more than hardware, that explains that, right?
They can probably sell it at a loss, and it's fine because it means more people are using the Steam store.
Right, exactly. All right. Well, why don't I switch over to my pick for this week? And I've actually
very different picks.
Very different picks. So I actually debated whether or not to do this pair of picks because these are not new movies. These are two movies. It's my double feature pick that came out last year. But given that we've been kind of still struggling with COVID, and I know at least I've not been really comfortable going to a movie theater. I have at one point last summer gone to one movie in the last 2 years, and it wasn't very good, by the way. But these two movies came out in 2021. And because if you're like me and haven't been to a theater in a while, you may still not have seen them. So I thought I would recommend them. And the first one is Spider-Man No Way Home, which I watched last weekend with Jennifer. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's kind of long. It's amazing to me how long some of these Marvel movies and other blockbuster movies are getting these days. But it's a very good story, and it's very hard to talk about this without spoiling some very important plot points. So I'm going to avoid really talking at all about a couple of the most interesting things about this movie, which is too bad. But especially since it only just came out on rental on iTunes, I think a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, I don't really want to spoil it for anyone. But it's the third installment of Spider-Man in the Marvel Universe. And it also stars Doctor Strange, who is Benedict Cumberbatch. And, Tom Holland plays Spider-Man. And so this is a return of Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Doctor Strange is involved. So are, Spider-Man's high school sidekicks are in this movie as well. And it really picks up where the last one left off, where Spider-Man is falsely accused of having killed someone. And so he becomes a pariah very quickly. And what I think is interesting about this, besides the pretty cool things that I can't really talk about because they'd be spoilers, is that it kind of explores the impact of being a famous person and what that means both to yourself and to the people around you, your friends and family, because Spider-Man now is a pariah in New York City, and people don't like him, and he just wishes, his friends can't get into college because they're associated with him, and so the colleges are rejecting them in their senior year of high school, and he just wants to make everything better, which is where Doctor Strange comes in, because I will say he goes to Doctor Strange to see if there's some sort of magic spell that can be done to unwind all this and make people forget that that these things, he's been accused of these things. And so the story goes on from there. This is, a lot of times Marvel movies are long on action and short on kind of drama and emotion, but this is a story that really does have a lot more dramatic moments and interesting and touching emotional aspects to it, which really come down to some of those spoilers that I don't want to reveal. But definitely a good movie, worth watching. I think, Federico, I know you're not a big Marvel person, but if you were looking for an entry into Marvel that didn't require you to watch like 100 hours of movies going back to the beginning of time, Spider-Man's a pretty good place to do that.
I like Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's a pretty good place to do it. And there's only been, the 3 Tom Holland movies, I think, are all very solid movies. And they hold up on their own very well, even though, there are references to other things going on in other movies, but not to the degree that it would make it hard to follow. So I would recommend that for you as well. And the second movie I want to talk about is Dune. And Dune is an epic space conflict. This is based on, a book from the 60s, by Frank Herbert. And it reminded me a lot of Foundation, which we've talked about in the past and did an AV club for with Club Max Stories, which, not surprising given that Foundation is based on a 70s era sci-fi, whereas this is a 60s era sci-fi story, both novels of epic proportions. So there's the same kind of dynasties and, royalty and political intrigue between different clans and groups on different planets. And so this all revolves around a planet that is mined for spice. And spice is a thing that allows people to fast travel through space, among other things. But that desert planet where the spice is mined is run by one clan and has a group of indigenous people who are basically in hiding to avoid being killed by these people who are doing the mining. And then some emperor somewhere decides, I'm going to mix things up and I'm going to give this planet to somebody else to do the mining. And they do that, and basically a battle ensues. And it's all about the impact of this on the people who are native to the planet, as well as the political intrigue between the different clans and what's really going on here. Now, this is part one of what is expected to be a two-part series.
Oh, two-part.
Yeah,
Okay.
two-part. And so it does kind of end at a place that feels very much like the halfway point and not a conclusion to a story. But there's a lot here, and I think it's really well filmed. The really nice exotic locations. I enjoyed it a lot. This is one of those movies that, because of COVID, it came out on HBO Max for streaming for like a month, and I actually missed it then. And then then it was in the theaters, I believe, for a short time, and then it came back, and now it's back on HBO Max. If you have that service, it can also be rented. It did pretty well. I think it was like the budget was like 165 million, and it made around 400 million. So I'm hoping they do. I'm hoping they do make that sequel. But in contrast, Spider-Man made like 1.8 billion. It's one of the biggest movies ever. It's up in the top 10. So it didn't do nearly that well, but hopefully it will. We'll get the sequel, because I think it's a story worth telling. And it's been tried before. There was a David Lynch movie in the 80s that was a little over the top. It had Sting from The Police in it, and it's very dated looking now, and I've never seen it, so I can't really comment on it. And then there was also a TV miniseries attempt too. Neither of those really did particularly well. I think this has been the storytelling in this, as well as just the production and visual effects, are really top notch. And I think it's a fun movie to watch. It's, again, kind of a long epic type of movie. I forget exactly how long, but I'm talking probably 2.5 or 3 hours, something like that. But great film. So those two that's my double feature pick for the weekend. You can you can watch Dune if you have HBO Max or want to rent it, and Spider-Man is on iTunes for rental too. All right, Federico, that's it for this week of Unwind. We'll be back next week. You can find the two of us at Mac Stories. That's macstories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next Friday, Federico.
Ciao, John.